Welcome, boys and girls, to Castle of Spirits Paranormal Podcast, episode 20. They said we wouldn't make it, Vince.
Yet here we are.
And here we are. And Vince, we are talking about something today that actually a listener, Christy, suggested, and we read her message on the last extrasode number 5. Do you remember what Christy suggested we do a episode on?
I do believe that it was haunted objects.
Right. It was haunted objects, which is why I've made you research haunted objects all week this week.
Oh, is that why?
It wasn't frivolous.
Good thinking.
Yeah. So this week we are covering haunted objects. And guys, for reals, it was really hard nailing down a couple of stories to tell you because there are so many haunted object stories out there that it was kind of hard to choose one. So instead, we each chose 2.
And spoiler alert for anybody out there listening and thinking, if they do Annabelle, I'm going to turn it off.
Annabelle.
We're not doing Annabelle.
Annabelle's overdone. And maybe I'm just jaded, but I feel like Annabelle is so overdone and I just don't feel like it's that compelling or interesting of a story. And maybe it's just because it's overdone, but no Annabelle.
None. However, what do we have?
Well, we should just start telling our stories.
I agree. Let's go. As usual, the lovely Jane will be telling her story first.
Why do you speak in that weird radio announcer voice?
It came with a microphone.
Well, we're going to buy you a new microphone. All right. So I will start first. And my first story, Vince.
Oh, one thing before we start. We did not tell each other what we were picking. So hopefully we don't run into each other at this point.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that we pick totally different stories.
So Jane.
Yes?
Surprise us.
And I shall. All right. The first story I'm going to tell you is called Busby's Stoop Chair.
A haunted chair?
A haunted chair. So Busby is the name of Thomas Busby, who was from Thirsk in North Yorkshire, England. And Thomas Busby was, some might call him an entrepreneur, some would call him a coin counterfeiter, some would just call him an all-around kind of bad guy. He did own a pub, hence the entrepreneur part, but he also was into coin counterfeiting. So Thomas owned a pub in Thirsk, and in that pub, he had a favorite chair that he did not want other people sitting in. Like I said, he ran a coin counterfeiting operation. It was with his father-in-law, Daniel. I don't know. I'm probably pronouncing this wrong. I couldn't find a proper pronunciation, but we're going to go with Autie.
Sounds good to me.
And one day, Daniel and Thomas got into an argument. There's no clear-cut story on what they were arguing about. Some say it was about Daniel's daughter, Elizabeth, who was Thomas's wife. Some say it was about one of their criminal
enterprises.
Flings. Yeah, one of their criminal enterprises.
I was going to guess that it was about the World Cup.
I doubt it, because this was in the 1700s, late 1600s.
Whoa.
So they got into an argument. And then later that day, Busby went back to his pub and found Autie there. And he was sitting in Busby's favorite chair.
Those are fighting moves.
Really. And he was threatening to take Elizabeth back with him, take her home with him. So Busby was clearly not happy. It seems he was less upset about his wife potentially being taken away and more pissed off that his chair was being sat upon by somebody else's bum.
I was going to say, he might have been doing him a favor.
No, Elizabeth was lovely.
Was she?
I assume so. Anyway, so he was sitting in his chair, and this really made Busby upset. So the story goes that later that night, Busby was all boozed up, and he was still pretty upset over the arguments that they'd had that day. And so he grabbed a hammer and he went to Audie's house where he bludgeoned him to death with this hammer. That sounds like a really awful way to go.
For sitting upon his chair.
Mm-hmm. So shortly after that, Busby was arrested at his pub and charged with the murder. And it was sometime in 1702, I almost said 2002, but in 1702, he was found guilty and sentenced to death by, this is horrible, by something called, he was to be gibbeted.
Oh, what is that?
Yeah. So I had to look it up. I didn't know what it was either. So a gibbet is, it kind of looks like a gallows type thing. But what a gibbet is where they would take a body, somebody who had been executed, and hang them up and kind of leave them there so that everybody could see this person, this corpse, and know, oh, this guy got dead for doing this thing. I guess I won't do that thing. He's hanging in the town square for a week. But sometimes they would use the gibbet as the form of execution. So they would hang the person from the thing, but it wasn't like the gallows where they would drop and they would die. They would just be hung from it and then left there to, I didn't see anything about strangling to death, so I don't know if they were like hoisted up some way that wasn't strangling them, but they would be left to die of like starvation or exposure.
Death by dangling.
Mm-hmm. So he was sentenced to death by gibbet.
Man, that is gross.
Yeah, and they had the gibbet right outside of his pub. So, like, here's his pub, here's the gibbet, his body's hanging just outside of his pub.
Did they bring the chair out and make him watch people sit in his beloved chair? That is cruel and unusual punishment.
No, but before he died, he is thought to say, and the only place that I found this quote, I looked in several places, I could not find the quote of the actual words of his curse, but there's an Unsolved Mysteries episode, which I will have the link in the video description or in the show notes, wherever you're listening. You can see the Unsolved Mysteries episode about this chair. Robert Stack, with his little direct eye contact into the camera and the little slight smirk on his face, quoted Busby as saying, "May sudden death come to anyone who dares sit in my chair."
Oh, is this the one? Okay, go on. I think I know what this is.
So he cursed the chair before he died. And I mean, this story is, it's a legend at this point, and it was hundreds of years ago, but it either happened when he was arrested, when he was being led to the gibbet, or there's another story that says he had one last wish to sit in his chair, his beloved chair, and have one last drink, and that he made the curse, after that. But either way, he made this curse before he died.
Man, I want to know who made this chair. This is not like a lazy boy or something.
No, and it's like a wood chair with like spindles. It doesn't look particularly comfortable. It's like this high back wood spindle chair. It's not padded. It's not even like a rocking chair. It's just...
There was no insert a coin and it vibrates or something?
Not that I could tell. I don't know what he had for this chair, but he loved this chair. So ever since then, there is this aura about the chair, obviously, that it's really scary, and there's legends that everyone, from what I could tell, everyone who has sat in the chair has been said to have died horribly very shortly after. I mean, I'm talking like that day.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, I'm pretty sure that everyone who ever sat in the chair is going to die eventually. And even those who have never sat in the chair are going to die.
Right,
so it's really super cursed.
It's super cursed chair. All of humanity is doomed to die at some point. But the earliest mention of somebody, falling to the cursed chair that I could find was in 1894. Now, remember, he was executed in 1702. So the curse took a minute to get worked up, I guess. So in 1894, there was a chimney sweep who sat in the chair. I guess he wasn't familiar with the curse. He didn't know. He innocently sat in the chair. And he was later found dead and hung from a tree near where the gibbet had stood, or just right outside that area. And then years later, his companion that he was with that night claimed on his deathbed that he had robbed and murdered this chimney sweep. So it was later that night that he sat in the chair that he was killed. Then we jump just a couple of years from 1894 to 1968.
Wow.
And there's two RAF, the Royal Air Force airmen drinking at Busby's pub that night. And
So the pub is still called Busby's at this point?
It's called Busby's Stoop.
Okay.
Yeah, and apparently it closed in 2012. So I guess it was there for hundreds of years, and it closed in 2012 from what I could see. So the pub had been popular with RAF airmen already, and they would always dare each other to sit in the chair. There's stories that, there were all these airmen who never came back from their tours because they had dared each other to sit in the chair. But also I think that, there was a lot of war going on between the 30s and the 60s.
Just a bit, yeah.
Yeah, there were several airmen who I assume didn't come back, whether they sat in the chair or not. But there's two airmen in particular. They were daring each other to sit in the chair. There's a hilarious exchange between the two airmen in the Unsolved Mysteries episode. The two actors in that episode were really into their roles. It was hilarious. So you'll have to check it out. But they dared each other to sit in the chair, and they each did. And later that night, they were leaving, and they were driving back to the airbase, and they never made it because their car went off the road. It crashed into a tree, and then they both died later on their way to the hospital. Now, you could say, drunk people leaving a bar are more likely to crash than, people leaving a supermarket in the middle of the day. But
that chair isn't at the supermarket.
It's not a supermarket. It was at the pub.
So I see this chair as kind of being involved in all this.
Yeah. With the curse and all, you might say that there's a connection.
Huh.
So some say that the chair has as many victims as 60 or more. Yeah, they're crediting it with upwards of 60 deaths. A couple of the other ones that I saw, there's not a lot of specifics around these. There was a roofer who sat in the chair, and he was killed later when a roof collapsed on him. There was a man who did some kind of construction, bricklaying or something, who sat on the chair and then later fell off of a scaffolding and died in a heap at the bottom of the house that he was working on. A cleaning woman, this poor woman, she tripped and accidentally fell into the chair. She did not sit in the chair. She tripped and fell and later died of a brain tumor. So the new owner of Busby's in the 70s, he was like, enough is enough. We're putting the chair in the basement so that people can't sit on it anymore. Smart guy, right? So there was a delivery guy delivering things to the pub, and he was in the basement or the cellar or whatever it was. And he thought that the chair looked way too nice and way too comfortable to be left in the basement, curse or no curse. And he sat in the chair. Dun, dun, dun.
Big mistake, I'm guessing.
It really was, because later that day, his delivery van, again, went off the road. I believe it hit a tree, and he was also killed. So the pub owner was like, this is enough. We're done with it.
Yeah, at this point, it's getting suspicious.
Yeah. So he donates the chair to the Thirsk Museum. So the county or the city, local museum, he donates it to the museum in 1978. And it is still there, and it is still on display today. You can go there and see it. Now, when they put the chair in the museum, they wanted to make sure that people weren't sitting in the chair. So they hung it on the wall, way up high. The top of the chair is almost to the ceiling. And that's where it's been ever since. They said that they don't ever take it down, not even to clean it. It stays on the wall. They want to make sure that nobody sits in it again. Now, the interesting thing is that in the Wikipedia entry for this chair, and again, that's in the show notes as well, it says that there's a question as to whether or not this chair is actually Busby's chair. They had the Thirsk Museum had a furniture historian come in. I was like, that's a very specific job. I'm a furniture historian. But they had this furniture historian come in and examine the chair. And he said that the spindles on the chair appeared to have been machine lathed rather than what they called pole lathed. And that's how chairs were made in the 18th century, was pole lathed. So he dated the chair to no older than 1840s.
So the chair traveled back in time to 1702.
Time-traveling chair. Yeah, so the chair was dated by this historian to be like 130 years newer.
Oh, I get it now.
So, who knows? Maybe it's not the actual chair. Maybe the historian was wrong. Who knows? But regardless, I think that even if it was in the 1840s that this chair was made, the first documented death was in 1894. So Busby's actual chair or not, it's got a pretty creepy reputation.
It's a pretty lethal chair, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it should be hung from the ceiling.
Right. So Vince, let me ask you, would you try it? Would you sit in it?
When I was 9 years old...
Oh, settle in, folks.
I carelessly and thoughtlessly walked underneath a ladder, and I did not make it out.
What do you mean you didn't make it out?
Not on my feet, anyway. I landed flat on my face.
What?
I learned a lesson at that time. Don't mess with furniture, whether it's a ladder or a chair.
How did you fall down under the ladder?
I don't know. I just went under the ladder, and I tripped, and I fell.
Is that a real story?
Yeah, it's a real story.
Okay.
I had just appeared on the Captain 20 show in Baltimore.
Oh, yeah.
With Dick Dizelle, who was also Count Gordeval, and he was my hero, and I wanted his autograph. So I went running underneath the ladder, and I biffed it, and he came and helped me up, and at least I got his attention.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the autograph, but every time I look at that autograph, I think about that ladder that tried to kill me.
Falling flat on your face.
So I guess the answer to the question is that I probably would not sit in the chair.
You wouldn't? See, I don't know if I would or not. Like, on one hand, I'm like, meh, I don't believe in that. But on the other hand, I'm like, but just to be safe, maybe I'll sit somewhere else.
Especially if it doesn't look very comfortable.
I would probably encourage somebody else to do it, though. Maybe you should sit in it and we'll just see what happens. But that's kind of sociopathic, isn't it? So maybe I wouldn't.
A touch sociopathic, yeah.
We'll also have photos to all of the objects that we're talking about today on our social media. So on Instagram, Facebook, find the post for today and you'll be able to see a photo of the chair and all of the other objects that we are going to talk about tonight. So that is Busby's Stoop Chair in Thirsk, North Yorkshire, England.
And from England, we shall now go all the way across the pond to the southern U.S. and the state of Louisiana.
Ooh.
For the haunted mirror of the Myrtles Plantation.
I knew you were doing this one.
Mirrors. Mirrors have existed in some sort of like in natural form since the prehistoric era. Like natural mirrors, like a pool of still water. Mm-hmm. But the first sort of portable mirror being made was made by collecting the water into some sort of vessel. So you could, bring it with you and stare at your reflection.
So the ancient Greeks.
Right. The first actual mirrors that were manufactured were made of polished obsidian and other reflective stones. Those date back 8,000 years. Later mirrors were made from polished copper, dating to 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, later in Egypt, about 5,000 years ago. It wasn't until 2,000 years ago that glass mirrors appeared. That's a long time, though.
Really, though? 2,000? That seems a lot more recent than I would expect.
It seems to me a lot longer ago. actually. But all that history aside, ever since people have been able to look into some sort of surface and see the reflection, plus, the reflection of the world around them, there's been superstition around those mirrors. And many people throughout history believe that mirrors served as a representation of the soul, which caused the ancient Romans to believe that mirrors should be respected for their mystical powers, and that if they were somehow misused by somebody, that a person's soul could get lost in the mirror forever. So now fast forward to the Victorian era, where it was commonplace for people to cover all of the mirrors in the homes after someone who's just died in that home.
Yeah.
But it's actually hard to pin down the exact reasons why. Some say it was to prevent the deceased soul from being trapped in the mirror and thus never crossing over. But in Judaism, I learned that the practice is part of a greater mourning ritual that marks the occasion of someone's death to pay respect to them. Now, along with those beliefs, there's also that age-old belief that if you break a mirror, you'll get 7 years bad luck, which according to Snopes, I looked it up, that's just a legend. So with all of this, it's easy to see how a belief in mirrors having the capacity to become haunted came to be. Mm-hmm. Mirrors, they see things. And depending on how old that mirror is, it's really easy to imagine that it might have seen a lot more throughout its lifetime than we ever will.
Yeah.
In that way, mirrors have kind of been like silent witnesses to all manner of things. And if you stare long enough into it, and you can imagine that you might see something playing back all that history.
If you stare into the mirror also stares back into you.
That's right. And it's just one more step will lead you to believe that maybe mirrors hold more than just reflections, but ghosts. Which brings us to the story of one of the most haunted mirrors in all of the land, which can be found at the legendary Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. The plantation itself it's world renowned. It was built in 1796 by a General David Bradford. They originally called it Laurel Grove. Bradford, he lived there with his wife Elizabeth and their 5 kids. He died in 1808, and in 1817, his wife Elizabeth assigned her son-in-law, Clark Woodruff, who was married to their daughter Sarah, ownership of it. And so he would manage the plantation.
The plantation, okay.
And they all lived there until 1834, when they sold the plantation and all its enslaved people.
Lovely.
To the Sterlings. And one thing it's interesting to note that in the Wikipedia article about the Myrtles Plantation, the word slave is only mentioned once. I thought that was interesting.
What do you mean it's only mentioned once?
Well, there's an entire article about the history of this plantation, and they only mention slaves once, which, I don't know, it does a bit of a disservice, I think, considering that it was a place that held enslaved people for so many years. Anyway, the Sterlings, when they took over, they remodeled the house and they literally doubled its size. At that time, they renamed it to the Myrtles because there were these crepe myrtles that grew all around. So they named them after that.
Oh, I thought it was like a family name.
No. Nowadays, it's just a bed and breakfast. Well, not just a bed and breakfast. It's one of the most popular bed and breakfasts in the American South, at least. And it is said that it is home to no fewer than 12 ghosts.
Wow.
Not 13, but 12. It'd
be a lot cooler if it were 13.
Yeah, I don't know why to just say 13. There's actually this common misconception that there were like 10 murders at the house over its history, but there was only one killing that can be confirmed. And that was of one of the former owners, William Winter, in 1871. He was on his porch and he was apparently shot by a stranger. And then he staggered into the house and tried to get up the stairs, but he died on the stairs. And apparently to this day, you can still hear his dying steps as he staggers up the stairs and dies somewhere along the 17th step.
Ooh, interesting. So, but I was thinking, so there's only one documented murder that occurred on the plantation, right? But it was a plantation that had slaves. Enslaved people.
So I'm thinking that
so
maybe
chances are pretty good that at least a few of those are slaves who died for one reason or another, and some of which could probably be considered murder today.
But yes, certainly people don't need to be murdered somewhere in order for a place to be haunted. A place can be haunted by lots of things, and a place that held enslaved people for hundreds of years wouldn't even need to have the trauma of death or murder, but just generally bad karma existing there. And that might be enough to haunt a place. But
I feel like it would be, yeah.
But we're talking about the mirror today.
Let's do it.
So there's a mirror on the property. Not a whole lot of information as to where it came from is given, but in this mirror, it's claimed that the ghost of Sarah Woodruff can sometimes be seen, along with several of her children who also died when they were in that house. They died of illness. One of the creepy things is that it's claimed that there's a handprint on the mirror that can't be washed off.
Ooh.
They've tried all kinds of things, and it just doesn't work, which reminds me of a lot of stories that I've heard of objects that are imprinted by some sort of either physical contact or some sort of a psychic contact from somebody who was wronged in some way.
Yeah.
So we may never actually know, well, we never will actually know the reason why that mirror is apparently haunted. But
so I guess they forgot to cover the mirror when there were some deaths in that household.
Maybe so.
But you mentioned about, the handprint and stories about, handprints or some kind of print showing up on objects. There, we've talked about Resurrection Mary in episode 19. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about Resurrection Mary was on the gate to Resurrection Cemetery, there's a spot where the bars of the gate are burned and kind of misshapen, and it said that that's where she put her hand on the gate to push it open.
There's also I think it is a courthouse somewhere in the South. I think it might be Alabama, where the face of a wrongly convicted African-American man can still be seen in the glass.
Really?
He was apparently executed for a crime he didn't commit. And that's just another one of those creepy stories about, well, in this case, it's glass and not a mirror, but things that can be imprinted for hundreds of years by some sort of an energy that takes shape in the form of a face or a handprint or something like that. I think that's fascinating. It's terrifying, but it's also really, really creepy.
Yeah, it's creepy, but it's also sad, that there could be that much angst and energy that leads to something like that happening.
Well, my only hope is that maybe the expelling of that energy and the directing it towards the glass or the mirror is enough to maybe free the individual from that angst and all that negative energy, so that maybe they can move on to whatever it is that happens after we die, and they sort of leave an imprint of themselves on the world for people to see so they don't forget.
Interesting. Mirrors, I've always thought mirrors are creepy, and I always feel like there's more to a mirror than just simply, reflecting back the things that it sees. They feel otherworldly, and I think that that's exactly why they have a reputation that they do. So, the idea of somebody being trapped in a mirror after death is not a far-fetched idea to me at all.
No, not at all. And I think that you can look at a mirror. It's hard for me to put it into words, but what I was thinking about was, imagine if you had a video camera that was running for hundreds and hundreds of years recording.
Yeah.
But there's no tape that you can watch back. But you do just know that camera has been recording everything that it sees for hundreds and hundreds of years. And if you could just gain access to that, all the things that you would see.
Yeah.
I don't know that would be worth anything other than just a curiosity factor or.
Right.
But I think that's one of the reasons why people are so attracted to mirrors.
Yeah, or have such superstitions about them.
And we've got this creepy mirror that we used to have in the old house before we moved into the castle.
And it's just sitting outside right now.
It's sitting outdoors. It's been through hot summers and freezing winters.
Yeah, and that mirror's old. It's probably, I'm guessing that mirror's from the 1930s. And we used to have it hanging in our living room. And I remember always feeling just a little bit creeped out by it because, like you said, it's like the things that it has seen. So I was keenly aware the entire time it was hanging in our living room that this mirror has seen some things. And what that is, I have no idea. It could be perfectly innocuous. It could be next to nothing. It could have been covered and stuck in an attic for decades, for all I know, but it's reflected things that I will never see. And I was becoming a part of that. We were becoming a part of that. It hung in our living room and it reflected us and our surroundings, and we're now part of its story. And I honestly feel like maybe that's part of the reason that I'm hesitant to bring it back in the house.
I want to bring it back in the house.
Yeah.
I don't really know. I mean, we don't have a lot of walls.
We don't really have anywhere to hang it.
But I would be willing to make room.
Well, then it can go in your office and you can have ghost people staring at you while you work.
Maybe.
Remember, I had those dowsing rods, and whenever I would get close to the mirror, when I had the dowsing rods, they would open up wide.
Oh, yeah. I forgot
Remember
about
that?
Yeah.
I could walk around the whole house. The dowsing rods just pointed straight forward. But as soon as I got close to the mirror, they opened up wide.
My worry is that if we bring it inside after it's been sitting outside for 5 or 6 years, that it might be angry.
Yeah.
But maybe if I clean it up and, talk nicely to it and gaze into it periodically, maybe something cool will come of it.
So you're concerned that if you bring that into the house and hang it on the wall, that you might be inviting something into the house that you then have to deal with?
Yes.
Well, funny you should mention that, because my next story, do you like that? My little segue there?
Yeah, keep going.
My next story is about just such an occurrence.
Oh?
Mm-hmm. Being an artist myself and a painter, I decided that I was going to choose one of the million haunted painting stories. And I chose the creepiest one that, unfortunately, there's not a lot of information, but it's a super creepy story. The painting itself is terrifying. The title of the painting is terrifying. And the few occurrences around it are pretty creepy. So, are you ready to hear about the painting titled The Anguished Man? Go ahead and Google that real quick, Vince. Everyone else, you can either Google it or you can check us out again on our social media, and we'll have a picture of the Anguished Man painting.
Oh, wow.
Have you seen that one before?
I don't know that I have, but it kind of makes the scream look very tame in comparison.
Yeah, for reals, it does. So the Anguished Man painting, the bulk of the information for this comes from, there's a Wikipedia article, but also the owner of the painting started a YouTube channel to kind of document the happenings. And so the bulk of the information comes from his YouTube channel, and really there's not a lot there. I did see that in 2016 they were talking about making a movie. Thankfully, that has not happened. And I couldn't find any information about that either, so I think that might have been kind of abandoned at this point. But let me tell you about the Anguished Man. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So the owner of the painting, his name is Sean Robinson of Cumbria, England. And he says that his grandmother left this painting to him in her will. So he inherited the painting from his grandmother. And when she was alive, as he was growing up, she kept this painting in her attic for 25 years. And she would always tell him about the painting, how it was evil, and that she had started to see a dark figure in her home right after she got the painting, and that she would hear, oh, this is creepy, she would hear crying coming from the painting.
Really?
Yes. So she also told him that the artist who created the painting, he's an unknown artist. We don't know what year the painting was made. We don't know who the artist was. But she said that the artist mixed his own blood in with the paint, and that he died by suicide shortly after completing the painting. Now, being an artist myself, I have to tell you a couple things. I find it hard to believe that somebody would mix blood in with oil paint because, blood is water-based. Water and oil don't mix. I mean, I guess you can still make the attempt to do it, but you can't really mix it.
Could be something more symbolic, though, if it didn't show up.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it could be acrylic paint, but being at least 50-year-old painting at this point, I find it hard to believe that acrylic paint had such vibrant colors, 50 years ago, but maybe. So when Sean received the painting, he didn't really believe his grandmother's stories, but he thought the painting was cool, so he took it home and he hung it up in his house. And Vince, would you believe it? Shortly after he hung it up in his house, he and his wife started seeing the figure of a dark figure standing at the foot of their bed at night.
Oh, no way.
Yes. They would also hear scratching and knocking and weird sounds like that coming from the painting as well.
Coming from the painting?
As well as that of a man crying. So on his YouTube channel, he's really only got a couple videos, and it could be chalked up to camera tricks, but there's a video where he says that he left a camera pointed at the painting all night long for 3 nights in a row, and on the first night it caught this scratching sound coming from the painting, and it shows that. It shows this painting being recorded in the middle of the night, and you can hear this scratching sound. And then another night, the camera angle's a little bit different. You can see a door in the room, and the door was left open. And at some point in the night, the door slowly swings shut. It doesn't latch, it just kind of swings about closed. And then another night, you hear this like a thump. It sounds like something got dropped on the ground, but he said that the next morning they looked and there was nothing disturbed. There was nothing out of place, nothing on the ground, but it's pretty loud, like dropping sound. So, yeah, I don't know. He uploaded several of those videos to his YouTube channel like 12 years ago, and there hasn't been a lot since then. He did upload a couple of updates in the last year, but nothing really new.
The fact that he only has a handful of videos and that he doesn't create a video a day or a video a week that has something outlandish showing up speaks more to its veracity, because I can see somebody thinking that they're gunning for Hollywood to make a movie, right? Another Conjuring movie about this painting.
Yeah.
And so it would make sense to make all kinds of videos, have a really robust social media.
Really put it out there.
Yeah.
Right. But it doesn't seem like that. He's got a couple of videos, like I said, 12 years ago, showing these experiments that he was doing overnight, and not a lot since then. I saw in one place that the painting is no longer in his house because his wife was really upset about it. But in another place, I didn't see anything that said that he had removed it from his house. So I don't really know what to believe. Like I said, there's really not a lot of information. But I think if you look at the photo of this painting and you know the title, The Anguished Man, and you just picture scratching and crying coming from this, it's terrifying. Terrifying.
Fascinating. I want to watch those videos. So we need to put a link on YouTube.
I'll link his YouTube channel in there as well. So you can see his YouTube channel in the video description in the show notes.
Awesome.
And it's, just kind of my dream to paint a haunted painting one day. I would never do that on purpose and just be like, look, oh, this painting's haunted, everybody. But if I painted something and it turned out to be really creepy and haunted, I would be like, job well done, man. I'm out. No more painting necessary from me.
Would that be the end? Then you'd be done? I
would probably stop painting because I'd be like, this is my crowning. How do you top that? You can't top that.
Well, I mean, maybe the painting doesn't get haunted for a long time.
I just want to make a painting that ends up being haunted. Maybe I'll haunt a painting someday.
Yeah, that is something to aspire to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could be sort of kept around in a manner, so to speak,
Yeah.
within a painting,
I won't
especially one that
cry,
you're very
though,
proud
because
of.
that's over the top. That's like you said before. That's like blunt force haunting.
Well, that kind of ties into my next haunted object,
Let's hear it.
which is Okiku, the haunted doll. Have you heard of this?
No.
Well, let me tell you about it. There's a doll that's housed today in a Buddhist temple in a city called Iwamizawa on the island of Hokkaido, Japan, near kind of close to Sapporo, Japan, that once belonged to a little girl named Okiku. So the story goes that the doll was bought in that very city in 1918 by a 17-year-old kid to give to his 2-year-old sister as a gift.
Oh, that's so nice.
She loved the doll and she kept it with her wherever she went. And sadly, the little girl died of an illness the next year when she was just 3. And her family built a shrine in their home for her that actually included the doll, who they now also named Okiku after their daughter. It wasn't until after the child had died and the shrine was built that her family members began to notice something strange. The doll's hair, which was in a traditional okappa style or like a bob style cut, the hair was growing.
No.
Yes. Allegedly, it grew down to the doll's waist. The parents would sometimes wake in the morning to find the doll by their bedside.
I just got total goosebumps. That is so creepy.
With a little coupon for a free haircut down at the local place. Take me this week, please. But all manner of other paranormal activity was going on in the house, like lights turning on and off, loud banging sounds, strange voices. And they seemed to intensify around the little girl's birthday and her death day. This led the family to believe, after consulting with local spiritual leaders, that their daughter's soul was somehow trapped inside the doll. They continued to live with the supernatural activity for decades.
Well, yeah, if you believe that that's your kid, I mean, how do you...
Right, they even grew comfortable with it as a sign that their child was still with them and still connected to them. Eventually, in 1938, this is like 20 years after the little girl died, the family moved away. And they wanted to bring the doll with them, but they were worried that doing so might cause the activity to cease or for her spirit to be disconnected from the doll because they thought maybe it had something to do with being near the girl's grave.
Right.
So instead of taking it with them, they asked the local Buddhist temple if they would care for the doll, and they said yes.
Oh, I was wondering how it ended up at a Buddhist temple.
Now, apparently the monks there claim that they do indeed have to cut the doll's hair to keep it from growing too long.
Ew. That's so creepy.
It is claimed that the temple even sent samples of the hair to be analyzed, and that the analysis returned a match to a human child's hair. The most recent, now I don't know about this, the most recent and perhaps the most troubling development are the claims that over time, the doll's mouth is starting to gradually open, and that if you look inside, you can see teeth starting to grow.
No. Do you have photos of this doll?
There are photos of the doll. We'll share those, of course, and they're very innocuous looking. I did find a YouTube video that talked about the history of this doll, which we'll put a link to it in the show notes. But
yeah.
One thing I read on there was very interesting. It was in one of the comments that somebody left. It was an explanation posed of why the hair is doing what it's doing. The comment says, the doll's hair is actually silk. The long strands of silk are folded inside the doll's head, and the end of each strand is kept outside. Eventually, as time goes by, the silk strands inside the head loosen up and they come out little by little, increasing the length of the hair. That's why it seems that the hair is growing. Killjoy.
Yeah, but also, why would the doll maker have like feet of the silk wrapped up inside the head to, you know what I mean? If it's going from a bob to down her waist and it has to keep being trimmed.
Right.
I mean, that sounds like sorcery to me.
It's a creepy story, all right.
It's super creepy. I have never heard that one.
And you can go see the doll if you're in Japan.
Ooh, we should do that.
You can go into the Buddhist temple, you can see the doll, you can pay your respects to it. and then go get a Sapporo.
I want to look at her little teeth.
I don't know if you can get that close.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate.
But if we tell them that we hail from the Americas and that we're here researching for the Castle of Spirits, maybe they'll let us in.
I doubt it. We don't hold that much sway.
Yeah.
So, Vince, I think it was in the extra-sode, you made mention that you have personal experience with a haunted object. And I don't know this story, so I'm going to need you to let it all out right now. I need to know every single detail.
All right. So when I was in my early teens, maybe 11 or 12 actually, I came into possession of, I guess what I could best describe as a carved head that's made from like a coconut. They have these Hawaiian coconut heads. This sounds silly.
That's the phrase for it.
That is the phrase for it. And some of them are kind of ghastly and all that. But the one that I had, it looked more like the face of an islander, like one of the traditional proud Hawaiian men.
Yeah.
Of history, right? And it's just this little head. It may have just been carved out of wood. I haven't seen it in about 30 years. Anyway, it was the likeness of a human face.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my sister had it and she didn't want it and I wanted to keep it. So I put it on my dresser.
Mm-hmm.
It had this cool little, if you turned it around, it had a little hiding spot in the back where you could put things like video arcade game tokens in there. Maybe later when I matured into my teens, I may have stuffed cigarettes in there, like, contraband, right? Mm-hmm. The contraband of the teenager. And, I had this thing on my dresser for years and years and years. Nothing weird ever happened, but at some point in my life, I got sort of almost like a psychic impression that maybe this thing was bringing me bad luck.
Oh yeah?
There was a period in my life, but that period of my life was also called adolescence.
Yeah, which was bad luck for all of us.
Yeah, it's a bad thing to go through adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
But I just had like a run of bad luck, one after another. I would, things wouldn't work out for me, socially.
Mm-hmm.
I'd lose friends. I'd get another friend, lose my friend. And eventually I came somehow to believe that I thought that this little head had something to do with it all. And so being a superstitious young lad, I got rid of it.
How did you get rid of it?
I think I put it in a box somewhere. I just wanted it out of my room. I wanted it away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And, things got better.
Interesting.
I think my general outlook improved. And again, you could always say that these things just happened because I grew out of certain things, grew out of certain phases, and maybe became a little bit more psychologically or emotionally mature. Stable. But, if you ask me honestly, I actually do believe that there was something attached to that head that maybe it wound up in my possession because nobody else wanted it.
Yeah.
Who had owned it.
So let me posit something to you. So your mom is always finding little things and sending them to you. Oh, do you want this? This was yours when you were a kid. What happens if she finds the coconut head and tries to send it back? Are you going to accept it? Or what are you going to do if that coconut head comes back?
Well, I'm no fool.
No,
I'm no fool.
Okay.
If I say it enough times, it might actually become true. And I don't think that I would turn it away. Maybe what I would do is I would kind of do what they do in the movies for cursed objects, like, I don't know, the Annabelle doll or Robert the doll.
Oh, I do love Robert the doll.
And maybe I would put it into a cabinet, or what I would do is I'd put it on a pedestal and I'd surround it with salt on the floor.
Yeah.
Of course, that wouldn't work too well.
Little offerings to make it happy, but also to keep it appeased and in its place.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I might invite its return into my life, but I'd be on guard.
Yeah.
To make sure that nothing came with it. maybe do a couple of cleansing rituals.
Yeah. Yeah, we could definitely do that.
It might be a cool thing if something did come with it.
I mean, it depends on what it is. Is it crying in the middle of the night? Because I'm not into that.
It never did that. I was the one crying in the middle of the night. And I blamed it on that coconut head.
And then you became the coconut head.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great circle of life that happens all the time.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, that's my story. It's nothing grand.
That's interesting. I mean, as long as we've been together, I've never heard of this coconut head.
I never even thought it was just something that kind of exited my mind the minute it left my presence, and the minute I realized I think I feel better without it in my life. Mm-hmm. I think I tried to forget it.
So friends, if you have ever experienced something like that, any kind of an object that you felt brought bad luck or was absolutely haunted or felt cursed, we want to hear that. You know, you can submit your story at castleofspirits.com/submit. If you don't want to really submit a story, you just want to say, hey, I had that happen, and give us, anecdotal details, then go to castleofspirits.com/lounge and let us know. Basically, what we're begging for here is you guys to join the conversation. Yes, I know it's thirsty to beg you to join the conversation, but, we can only stand so much of each other. And really what we're here for is you.
It's a really big castle.
It really is a big castle. There's room for all of us, and we want to get to know you guys.
Please do it so she'll stop begging.
So Vince, that's all I have today. Again, if you want any more information on any of the things that we talked about today, just check the show notes. Or if you're watching on YouTube with the creepy cool visuals, you can check the video description there.
And if you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review, because the more reviews that we get on Apple Podcasts, the more visible this podcast becomes.
Yes, please do that, because we are still a brand new podcast, episode 20. We are but babes, and we have a goal of world domination, and you, friends, you are our conduit to world domination. And finally, when you head over to castleofspirits.com, make sure you sign up for our email list, because very soon we're going to start doing some fun things there. We're going to do some polls, some calls for different types of stories, all kinds of stuff that you will not find on any of our social media. You will only get it through our email list, and we promise not to spam you.
And don't forget to check us out on our next extra-sode, where we're actually going to read some stories from the Castle of Spirits story archive.
Yes.
Of people experiencing haunted objects.
Yes.
That's going to be fun.
So, Vince, I can hear our play-out music, which is our cue that it's about time to go.
Yep, there it is again.
Yeah.
It's handing us our hats.
Mm-hmm. So, I think we will say boom.
Find yourself an object and be haunted by it.